Devin Millar, who represents IBM Watson, and Marie Walters, who represents Bentley Systems, to join us in our panel. Excuse me, along with along with our speakers and myself. And we will commence with some Q&A. And you do the speakers. I mean the microphone. Okay. I'm going to kind of pose a question to kind of kick things off. Excuse me. Myself, we have some real experts here that can maybe cover some of the things the questions that I would have. And I put a number when I was covering the technologies. I had quite a list of technologies and things that and solutions that I thought we would be using.
I guess your microphone got knocked off your shirt, so we're having a hard time.
Oh,
Sorry.
so sorry. Let me start over again here, real quick. Anyway, so the question I want to pose to our panel is, of all, there was quite an extensive list of technologies that we've been discussing here. Everything is smart transportation, smart construction, connected, completely connected infrastructure, communications, people movement, safety, security, all these things. What, if you were to rank, I don't know if it's really, they're all important, but if you were to point out something right now that you see as the most important thing that we would focus on and start to implement, what would that be of all the number of things that we've been discussing here? Anybody care to?
Sure. Can you hear me back there? Yeah, sure, great. So I think if you are thinking of what do you want to do with this new technology revolution we are seeing in IoT, my advice would be start somewhere, start small, start anywhere. And I would start where you see the biggest benefit in terms of dollars so that you can continue to start. And then see where it goes, see what you learn, and take it from there. So I would shy away from huge IT project. I would try to identify a small piece where you can start and learn.
So I agree, and I also think that we tend to overlook, with all the new technologies that are coming in, all of the existing data that we've got that's pretty good, that's been running our businesses to date. And I would look at where you've got really good data sets. I think Yoni and her elevator example they have really good data sets. So start where you've got a really good data set and look at how some of the new technologies like 3D mapping or 3D BIM technologies can really give you that visibility into those good data sets in order to maybe move yourself forward in terms of a business challenge that you've got.
I was going to say, so we've been collecting data from the elevators for years, but it's gone into kind of a repository that there's like 2 engineers that look at it every now and then. And so by partnering with the IBM Watson platform, we can actually make sense of that data. So it wasn't new data, it's just figuring out what to do with the data that we have.
The one thing that we have noticed from a smart cities perspective is many of the stakeholders are usually not engaged from the beginning. So you may have unexpected results based on just one-sided conversation made at the decision-making stage. So if all the stakeholders can be brought on board and all the kinks ironed out to the extent possible, that would avoid problems down the stream, and that's something that's often overlooked.
Steve.
Yeah, I'm going to speak up. I look at the world from...
Steve, hold on, let me give you the microphone. Ask everybody to speak into the mic so we can hear you. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Steve Baker from the NLC, and I cover logistics for us. From a point of moving freight through the city, how would you prioritize the use of the technologies that we've been talking about? I mean, we've got transportation companies logging all the time, spending millions of dollars on roads. It seems to me it's also use your roads smart. So how do we do that?
Well, I would go, so what's changing, right? I mean, I think that's a question you want to ask yourself. What's changing right now? And what is changing is sort of like the advent of cognitive machine learning, AI, and so forth, right? And when we see humongous progress in terms of people developing algorithms and so forth, and the availability of data. The sensors are, pricing of sensors is going to zero. So you can actually, collect a lot of real-time data if you wish. So when we look at smarter cities, where people are really successful, you might want to look at Singapore, mostly cities in Southeast Asia, interestingly enough. And so what are they doing? They're really making those huge technology investments in that technology. But again, they start with a region, a smaller part of the city. They don't say, hey, we're going to make Singapore a smarter city. Start with a road, then expand it to a neighborhood, and from there they expand it to the city. So if the question is, how should we allocate the money? I think that's pretty hard because you always have lobbying groups. You always have people who have a certain interest to build more roads, as opposed to collecting more data and using those roads in a smarter way. So I think, in the end, it's outcome talks. So start small, start with a road, start with a neighborhood, and instrument that and show the impact and show what you can save on what you don't have to do in terms of road expansion and so forth. That's what I would do.
One example I would give is from Uber. So they have a similar problem going on right now where a lot of people request taxi cabs in the same area at the same time. So they are doing a lot of predictive transportation analytics. So based on past history and based on if there's an upcoming social media event coming up, so then they can predict there should be more drivers encouraged to leave this location. So a similar example can be made for freight management. If you know what other components of the system are moving at any given time, or which are predicted to be moving, then you can properly plan and maybe have an allocation saying no trucks before 9 p.m. or stuff like that. So it can feed into the policy decisions that can be made.
Excuse me. I'm Ken Pierre Humbert from Schneider Electric, and his question is to Yanni. Could you tell me a little bit about the business model of how what you're doing with the cost of the predictive maintenance? Are you selling that as a service to your customers, or is it rolled into the product as a feature? And in both cases, either case, do you have enough data at this point to understand the ROI?
So to answer your last question, we are just getting started on the actual commercialization of this. What our intent is to add it on as a paid additional service. With our new installations, we're bundling it for free for the first 6 months or so that the customers can see it and use it and use those dashboards and get that integrated into their daily life in the building and get to a point where they don't want to be without it. And then, but we are asking a premium for that service. How will that all flow through the whole commercialization cycle? I can't say at this point in time, but that's exactly where we are now. Is we certainly are asking a premium for it.
I just have a brief question. I'm Larry O'Brien of ARC. I'm on the cybersecurity team. So now that a lot of these smart building assets are ostensibly nodes on a network now, how are you addressing the cybersecurity implications of that?
With the elevator?
Yeah, and I apologize, I missed the first presentation, but with any of this, right? So we have smarter buildings and smarter cities and intelligent elevators that are telling us about their condition and so forth. But there's also, seems to me, to be a cybersecurity aspect to this. Can you comment on any of that?
Yeah, of course. So I think cybersecurity is that's that's table stakes in my opinion. And so of course we're addressing that at IBM through the platform, through Watson, and we have all security they're basically coming with a platform, right? So as you know, security is very expensive if you do it for a single application. That's why you really need to have that platform approach to address it effectively and cost effectively. So we really do it through the platform, but it's, as I said, it's table stakes. If you're not safe and secure, you're just not in the game.
My name is Chris Davis. I'm VP of Smart Cities at Simcom Lighting, and I have to say the presentations were quite impressive. One question that Kurt and I were talking about here is we're gathering a lot of data, and then the real question is how do you decide which data is relevant and how do you get it back? Some of you want situational awareness, some of you want alarms and alerts and analytics and all that stuff. So how do you decide what's best and not cause the cities to suffer from information overload? We provide smart and connected infrastructures for cities, lighting, sensors, all this stuff, and I mean it's just a lot, right? So I'd love your opinions because I think it's a problem that people aren't really thinking about if you're looking at interoperability and the whole, not just the part.
So Bentley Systems is very much into 3D and visualization and things like that, and we've seen a big people. If you've just got dashboards and just an overload of information, it doesn't help in terms of homing in on where attention needs to be put. So we've seen a lot of, particularly with the 3D photogrammetry, mapping the cities, simply the cities doing that to gather the information that they have and seeing it pictorially in a 3D model of just where assets are. Then once they've got that basic model, then being able to bring in other data and overlay that against there. So an example I'll give is Penn State campus, which is a university campus. They basically were being overloaded with data in their facilities department as to where to send their maintenance crews. Basically, the base problem was they only had like schematic drawings of buildings and what they had. So they very quickly did a total campus model of a reality model of where all their buildings were, linked it to their maps, and then linked that to their maintenance systems basically, and then very easily able to really home in on where the important tasks were, where they were, how to address that kind of challenge in what crews to send out and so on. So we're very much a believer in pictorially giving you that reality view of so people respond way better to pictures than they do to sort of charts and words and stuff. But that's so I would say give the data into the hands of the people that need to use it and let them figure out what they need rather than trying to start out figuring it out for them, if you see what I mean.
So I used to do a lot of work in manufacturing. So I worked for General Motors and General Electric. So you have reams and reams of data, just like what you're describing there. And I think the same principles here apply as well, which is link it to the outcome that is most important to the persona you're addressing. Make everything you do persona-based, meaning, so there's a maintenance supervisor who needs to look at very different data as the production supervisor. The same must be true for the city. So what is the outcome? What are the outcomes they are interested in? And then make it as simple as possible. So, my dream always was in a factory, give somebody a new sheet, a printout every hour that has 4 graphs on it. That's all they need to know. So today, this was a long time ago. Today, you have mobile devices, but I think the principle still applies. Minimize the amount of data you present and maximize the outcome, because otherwise they get confused.
I think that's particularly true when you look at a lot of city workers. They're not IT people. Many of them are big screwdriver guys.
Sure. But I don't really think it matters whether they're IT or the people on the line or whatever their job is. I think what matters is look at your iPhone, right? I mean, it presents all the information in my mind in the most simple way you can imagine, and I think they work very hard on doing that. And I think it's our responsibility to do the same way, to integrate the solutions we are providing into the workflow of the people to make that job easier, not harder. Because often, you see IT tools being designed really maybe for IT people, but not for the people who are actually eventually using those. So it's really when you end up with a simple tool, people think like, oh, this was simple to do. No, it was actually really hard to make it simple. Right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Our experience from a geospatial perspective has been that we are still taking baby steps across most cities in the US. So the reason we had to build the indoor mapping robot is because we did not have even floor plans to begin with. So how can we navigate people inside buildings when they don't know what rooms they have? Similarly, we wanted to display to them what 3D modeling displayed over the web can do, but they don't even have a 2D map which everybody can use. So we are still taking those baby steps. We are getting to a direction where hopefully we'll have the problem information overload. Right now, we are nowhere close to that, most cities.
I think for us, it comes back to those customizable dashboards. So, what the building manager needs to see and the maintenance supervisor needs to hone in on are different. So we're kind of putting it into their hands to be able to pick and choose for themselves what is the information that's useful and kind of move the noise down the way a little bit.
Any other questions? Yes.
Kurt Kirkby with Avista Utilities. So it's in the same context of the question, but it seems to me that sensors are dirt cheap, lots of data, but the challenge is we don't really have comm networks that support that today, and it's going to be a problem in many cities that are not city size. So there's potential of creating this big divide between urban and rural America. But do you see it being distributed from an intelligence standpoint instead of a centralized concept? So just comment on where you think it's going to end up. Is it going to stay centralized, or is it going to distribute peer-to-peer intelligence?
Long term, the answer is very simple. It got to be distributed. That's where it's going to go for sure. The question is, when you have that breaking point of it's not central anymore and you move to the distributed system, right? So I will be honest with you, I'm not smart enough to give you an answer on that question. So right now it will stay central for a while until you get to a point where you overload the networks, where you don't get the outcomes you're desiring, right? So I think the key is to always look at what outcome are you trying to achieve, and that should drive, what solution you want to implement next. And I think it's quite possible that at some point you say, you know what, if you have a town with 500 people, they're fine where they are, right? How much more smartness do they really need? And maybe. And I don't think it's the price of the sensor that's going to drive that, because you're right, sensors are dirt cheap. I think it's the maintenance of the sensors, the maintenance of the algorithm is like, how useful is the information? How much outcome are you getting? So I think as we are learning from these larger cities with centralized networks, what the benefits are they are seeing, we'll learn what we should get to a smaller city, and eventually we'll get to a point where we implement it somewhere and say, you know what, we don't see any outcome, so let's not make that mistake again. I think we're all learning. I think that's where we're really at.
I would expand on it a bit. I mean, it's a great point. Just because we're moving to an era of urbanization for a lot of factors, demographics is obviously driving that. I mean, the age of the population, the division of the population, all those kinds of things, and also what global part of the global region you're in and so forth. They all have different reasons for urbanization, but this notion that we have to partition the urban areas from the rest of the up to the rural areas or to the other smaller cities is defeating kind of the purpose of the technology and the notion in the first place, because yes, there's reasons for urbanization, but this distributed, the same technology will work in a distributed system just as well as it will for the urban areas as it will for the rural areas. So in other words, the small cities or the small towns are not going to be isolated, or we're not going to partition. At least that's the intent. We don't want to partition off segments of our demographic. You know, as I was saying in my first beginning of my presentation, was what we really want at the end of the day here, with the technology and everything that drives it, is the quality of life, and that same quality of life has to be distributed. I know this is probably more of a urban planning philosophical approach, but along with all the technology that goes with it, but that's the approach I think we're probably going to have to take. Okay, I think we're probably getting pretty close to wrapping things up here. Unless there's any other questions, I think we can probably adjourn.